I love Gilmore Girls as much as the next person, but I thought it would be cool if today I discussed some of the problematic or controversial things in the show that we overlooked, either because we were young at the time and blinded by our love for the show, or it just went right over our heads for whatever reason. But even though I have made multiple videos praising this show and saying how great it is, every show has problems, especially older ones. Also, I'll link my whole Gilmore Girls playlist down in the description if you're interested in seeing all my videos about the show. And yeah, let's just get right into it because I thought this would be a good way to end the series. So I've compiled a bunch of my own thoughts, and also I asked you guys in a YouTube community post what you thought. So the first thing I want to address is the revival, because that was where a lot of issues came in. But especially with Rory's character, we all know what happened there with the revival. There were many issues there, but the thing that stood out to me the most is how she treats her boyfriend Paul, because they're very much together, but she constantly forgets he's there, cheats on him, and blatantly dismisses him rather than just ending the relationship. And it's played for laughs. Unfortunately, it doesn't really work, and again to me shows how she really mirrors her mother Lorelai. Someone even said that Rory's name is like a nickname for Lorelai, like she's named after her mum. I don't know how I missed that. Like, did I just not hear it when it was playing? I don't know, but that even highlights to me more how she's like a mini version of her mother. And to me, her mum's relationship with Max was like that, where she would forget about him or just disappear on him. And Rory neglects Paul in the same way that Lorelai kind of rejected or dismissed Max at multiple points. So it's a bit like history repeating itself. And another huge issue I had was with how Logan disrespected his partner in the revival and cheats on her multiple times with Rory, and the show plays it off as this fun thing, like, oh, he's just going back to his player ways, even though he was very much committed to Rory, and it didn't seem very authentic or the sort of thing that he would do anymore. So in general, the show does have a tendency to romanticize cheating, and earlier I gave it a pass because Rory was a teenager, what do you expect? But to be doing that when these are adults we're talking about, it's a very different story. In general, there are many issues in Gilmore Girls with how the relationships are portrayed. A lot of them are very toxic, and you don't really notice this at the time until you go, okay, wait a second, what is one healthy relationship in the show? Crickets. It's really hard to think of. I mean, Logan and Rory, I'd say, were a healthy couple, but so many toxic moments and the way their relationship started and everything, that it's still there, it's still prevalent. And this is coming from someone who loves Logan and Rory together, okay? But I can admit fault. But like, let's start with Jess, okay? It's pretty problematic to suggest that this bad boy loner with a heart of gold can really care about you and get involved with him, even though he doesn't call you and he doesn't really organize plans properly and he has anger management issues, but he'll turn into this great guy. Now, it's great that happened with Jess, but the chances of that happening in real life are pretty slim. Same with Logan. Oh, he's a ladies' man, commitment phobe, is blatantly, directly telling you, like, I'm not that kind of guy. I don't want a serious relationship. Like, he's telling that to your face what he wants, and yet he'll change and fall in love with you and commit to you. Like, it's really sweet, but it's very much a fantasy. Jess also had a very strange character arc, and I mean, it was nicely written, but it's not as well written as people make out. Like the fact that he disappears and then apparently comes back a really changed man, but a lot of that happened off screen, so it was hard to see exactly how that unfolded. It seems like a lot of projection from fans who maybe idolize and romanticize him and really want him to be this great guy, but aren't looking at the reality of the situation. And Jess wasn't that great a boyfriend. Even with Shane, that girl he was dating, it was super weird how he was kissing her, trying to make Rory jealous and blatantly disrespecting her, and Rory then got mad and then was pretending that she didn't care, even though she was in a relationship relationship at the time with Dean, so it shouldn't have bothered her. And Jess comes in and out of her life when he feels like it, and then in like season 4, he shows up randomly at her dorm to tell her that he loves her and wants to run away with her. Keep in mind, this boy had basically ghosted her and disappeared on her, and it's framed as like this romantic love proclamation, but actually it's a really weird thing to do, and no wonder she didn't want to run away with him. And then he gets mad at her for not wanting to be swept off her feet, but like, why would she? It's all very out of the blue, and she doesn't owe you anything, you know, like she doesn't need to say yes if she doesn't want to. And the same with Logan, he's just always trying to make Rory like him, win her back, follow her around, send her gifts. And I like that Logan was making an effort because I like his character and he genuinely cares about her. He knew he messed up and that he needed to make it better. But when you look at it from a certain perspective, it is odd because men in these shows are continually chasing after Rory, and she's blatantly saying like, no, I don't want to be with you, go away. And they keep trying. And think of how Logan embarrassed Rory in the middle of a seminar by reenacting that play, and it was all a way of getting her attention. And again, it's framed as like this romantic gesture when actually it was a bit much. Again, another example of toxicity with relationships in this show that was a bit overlooked is when Jess comes back in like season 6, and we're meant to believe that he's changed, but he's still not at a point yet where he's really changed. She's made some progress, but like that dinner with Logan and Rory, obviously it's understandable that Logan's protective of Rory because she's his girlfriend, but Jess seems really annoyed that Logan's there, and he's pretending to be polite and civil and stuff, but it's like he was hoping that he'd have alone time with Rory, which is super weird and disrespectful considering she's got a boyfriend at this point. Logan was very much suspicious when he saw Jess in the driveway, but he tried to put aside his doubts and be friendly and civil. But because Jess was being so antisocial and giving him one-word answers, of course Logan was going to realize that something was off. Logan of course overreacted then and started insulting Jess's writing and making fun of him and being an ass, but he didn't just do that unprompted for no reason. He was very much triggered by Jess's behavior, and yes, I'm glad that Jess didn't stoop to Logan's level by physically attacking him. It was good that he didn't resort to physical violence like he definitely would have in the past, but that doesn't mean that his behavior was necessarily okay. I'm pointing this out because often Logan was framed as the bad guy in that situation who ruined the whole night, but in fact, Jess was a part of that. Both men in that scene end up being pretty toxic, and Rory is just trying to get them both to calm down, and then she ends up fighting with Logan afterwards, and the whole thing is just a shambles. Also, in terms of the relationships, one of my subscribers, E, said, I know people complain about Dean a lot, so that's not new, but the thing that always makes me consistently uncomfortable when I watch the show is how much it glosses over or ignores how quickly and intensely angry Dean gets and other clingy or controlling behavior. In other characters, those responses are criticized by both the framing in the show and the characters around them, but with Dean, the show itself often frames his highly reactive anger as justified. For example, having Lorelai ultimately side with Dean when Rory doesn't say I love you back, and it seems to be excused by the narrative itself, even though a lot of viewers these days don't like it. The first time I watched the show, I really struggled to process why Dean made me so uncomfortable, and I eventually realized it was the lack of accountability from the writing more than anything. When other characters react inappropriately, it feels more frequently called out, so it gives off the impression that the writers don't actually see a problem with his behavior in the first 3 seasons anyway. And I had the same reaction because at points, Rory is really worried, let's say, about Dean flipping out at her for losing a bracelet. And relationships in high school are meant to be fun, not take up too much time, just be you learning about yourself. And all the men in the show at some point have been toxic. That includes Luke. Like, I can barely think of any male characters who haven't been just completely out of line at some point or another. In my community post, Rachel Martin said, "This is why Logan will always be my favorite. Yes, he was a spoiled trust fund baby, but he knew that. He never hid who he was and matured a lot in the last few seasons. Progression felt natural, whereas Dean and Jess had to leave Stars Hollow and get away from Rory in order to mature. It felt like Logan was the only one who just grew, and we saw it on screen, not off screen, and that's why he's my favorite as well." But yeah, in terms of the relationships as well, there was a lot of disrespecting other women in order to get Rory her moment to shine, or just ignoring the other female characters, I guess because they're seen as less important, but that's no reason to disrespect them. For example, Lindsay, Dean's wife, he literally cheats on her to be with Rory, and I don't think we ever fully get closure around how damaging that must have been for her self-esteem and how wrong that was. So clearly a lot of people agree. And it was just so messed up because Dean treats her like shit, yells at her, gaslights her, makes her think that she's the problem, takes his anger out on her, then cheats on her, and the whole thing was so unfair. And yeah, another guy character that was an issue is Marty. He was such a fake nice guy. This idea that he genuinely valued a friendship with her and they'd hang out all the time, and I was like, I don't buy this. And then the minute he finds out that she's not into him, he just can't handle it. And then he even lies about how they met and stuff to his girlfriend because he still liked her, and it was just pathetic. And Corey Dawn basically agrees with me. She said, my main issue was the lack of any healthy relationships. Emily and Richard were still fighting over things that happened 20 years ago. Sookie tried to make Jackson get a vasectomy and he lied to her about getting it, resulting in an unplanned pregnancy. Yeah. Misandry, double standard. Lorelai was impulsive and selfish in every relationship she was in. She'd regularly decide she made a mistake being with her partner and jump into a relationship with whoever she thought was a better option at the time. Even with Luke, they were both constantly keeping secrets from each other and lying. Rory's relationships were all unhealthy too. Dean was very possessive and got aggressively angry at the smallest things. Jess did not respect Rory's boundaries, and Rory wanted to change him and then got upset at him when it didn't work. With Logan, instead of having a mature conversation with him, Rory pretended to forgive him and then was awful to him for weeks without saying why. None of the relationships shown were healthy, and the characters rarely took responsibility for their wrongdoings, especially Rory. It would be okay if any one of these relationships were framed as unhealthy, toxic, not something to root for, but they weren't. They were all meant to be shipped. Relationships don't have to be perfect, but the toxicity in all of these is enough to throw the whole thing away. I totally agree with that. And then the one healthy relationship we did have was Lane and Dave. And then with Max as well, he was not a good option for Lorelai. He was just a bit desperate and crossing a lot of boundaries and wanting her to go out with him, even though she was like, this is a bit inappropriate. Proposed to her on the phone mid-argument. I think it's odd that they were always pushing how her and Luke were meant to be together, but they were clearly clashing in so many ways, and there was all this build-up, but then when they actually got together, it's like they didn't really understand each other properly. And then throwing in the curveball of a secret daughter with April, and he kept saying, sorry, I can't do this right now, I really need to focus on my child. What adds to the weirdness of these relationships is the way virginity is treated. Like, it's made into such a big deal. If Paris sleeps with someone, oh my God, you can't be academic and sleep with someone. And then Rory's grandparents freaking out because they think that she's done something wrong by being with Logan. And then Lorelai thinking it's some kind of amazing thing that Rory hasn't slept with anyone yet. And then, oh yeah, and then the consent issues of Jess pushing and pushing when Rory doesn't want to sleep with him, and it would be her first time. So, you know, even more of a reason to be considerate and slow, and he's just making her feel uncomfortable. And yeah, and he never apologized either. In fact, we're meant to feel bad for him because he's going through something at the time. Like, okay. One of my subscribers said, this is a super minor thing, but it always stood out to me as weird. Rory lies to Logan about him being her first. It's a throwaway line and is never further addressed. Why did she lie about that? Does that mean Logan knows nothing about any of her previous relationships? And then in terms of a change of topic away from the relationships and just general things about the show, the diet and the food, and it's so bad how the girls on the show eat, and I've discussed this in many of my videos before, so I'm not going to keep talking about it in too much detail. But if any of the viewers have struggled with their body image at any point, which I think most people have, let's be real, it could have a really bad impact on you, because you see them stuffing their faces constantly with junk food and then saying that they feel great and they look great, and everyone praising them for being so skinny and not exercising and not eating well, and then making fun of girls who do try to stay in shape and eat well or eat vegetables. It was the weirdest thing, and it felt like this very misogynistic way of the show being like, oh my God, they're so quirky, they can stay skinny and eat whatever they want, they're so superior. Can you imagine how negatively people would have reacted if it was a character like Sookie, who was eating loads of junk food and being like, oh, I can eat whatever I want, it's so much fun? People would say, oh my God, she's got a food addiction, she's got eating issues, ugh, does she have no self-control, she's disgusting. But because it's these skinny girls doing it, it's seen as okay and not disgusting. If they looked any different, or if they were going through weight gain or something because of this food, people would say, oh my God, they have eating disorders, they're disrespecting their bodies so much. Like, also, I was DMing one of my subscribers about this, and so you can go and follow me on Instagram if you want to talk to me on there. But Anne said basically that Sookie's kitchen is one of the most unrealistic working kitchens she's ever seen. I thought that was so funny. But she said there's food out on counters, people making things and just lets food stay out for hours and go bad. Sookie double dipping and using the same spoon when she tastes food in the kitchen, and use the same spoon to feed Lorelai that tastes goods. The fridge is not stacked correctly, just to show a chef how Sookie treats her kitchen, and Gordon Ramsay would have a hissy fit and close the kitchen. I don't know why I find that so funny, but it was always in the back of my mind, and I thought something's a bit off, but it never really clicked. And I think that's what this is. Now it's just, I cannot unsee it. That's the issue. It's actually so gross. Like, it's gross, and I will never be eating at Sookie's kitchen because I'll probably get a disease or something because it's unhygienic. And she also said the cringiest moments from Sookie and Lorelai is when they ate at the owner of the Dragonfly Inn's funeral, and they go and rudely and selfishly ask the son, when he's carrying the casket, about buying the inn. He's a grieving son, and this can wait until after he's carried his mother to her last resting place. I get they're desperate, but at least wait until the body is cold before you go and hassle someone. Very funny, very, very true. Some other issues I wanted to address is the general parenting in the show, parental negligence, and this is difficult. It's a fine line because the show actively makes a commentary about generational trauma and parenting. So it's not like a, oh, whoops-a-daisies. The show genuinely was very intentional with how it crafts, you know, the mother-daughter lineage, all that. However, what the show doesn't do such a great job of is acknowledging how severe Emily's emotional abuse is, for instance. And I guess because it's not physical, it's seen as okay, or because it's a woman doing it, it's seen as not bad, but it's actually really terrible. And same with like Jess being blatantly neglected by his mother. And I feel like the show didn't go hard enough on how wrong that is. Another issue is lack of diversity. This is one of the most prominent criticisms of the show, probably, is that there's just a lot of white people, not much else going on, and a lot of black characters are just treated as tokens, not really given their own storylines. In A Year in the Life, it did improve slightly because they clarified that Michelle was LGBT, so they were trying to be more open and expressive about it, but there's still a lack of exploration of these themes. Also, just general racist comments, like I know a few people mentioned Indian food. I remember that, like just comments about other cultures, like made in a demeaning way and then not addressed properly. I've had a few people mention to me that the creators planned for Sookie to be LGBTQ+ or something, and then they changed it because the network didn't allow it. So I don't know how much of this is the show's fault and how much is the network's fault, but either way, it's a problem. And also in general, some of the jokes throughout they make about gay people or something are meant to be funny, and they just have not aged well. Another issue is fat shaming and body image. So there's this not like other girls thing going on with Lorelai and Rory, who seem to think they're slightly better than other women, and it's interesting to me that they only seek out friendships with girls who don't overshadow them too much. Do with that what you will, but they often make derogatory comments about other women's bodies, and you could look past it in the original show, but then they're still doing that in the revival, and that's just not on, because by that point it's like a current show and they should have known better. They should have learned something. Slut shaming and things like that is not appropriate to be doing now in 2023 or in even 2010. It's not appropriate then either. At that point you should have figured it out. And Rory making comments like, oh, I know that I literally stole Dean from his wife is what she did, but like, oh my God, the wife's the problem. And in general, like, oh my God, that ballerina looks so fat, I'm going to criticize her in my piece I write about her. And then they don't fat shame Sookie, but then they do with everyone else. Like, okay, make it make sense. Another thing I thought of is the unrealistic portrayal of financial realities and classism, and this was something I've discussed in other videos, but I'll mention it again. there's not really an accurate exploration of being a single mother and struggling financially, or class issues. And Gilmore Girls is very much a fantasy in that sense, and it doesn't really explore what it's like for working class people either. And they also keep making out that Lorelai and Rory are like these self-sufficient, self-made, badass boss babes, which they are, but only to a certain extent. And actually they are extremely privileged. Lorelai comes from a very rich family, so it's overlooking these systematic privileges that they have, as well as both being attractive and all these other things that the show just doesn't address properly. And the truth is, they've got the Gilmore name, so of course they're going to be successful because they've got that reputation, and most people don't have that. Another thing is familial relationships and issues present there. So I thought about it and realized that one of the relationships on the show that has many issues, that's the most, I guess, romanticized and idealized and made to seem cute, is Rory and Lorelai, because they're meant to have this besties dynamic. It's all over the promo posters, they're the main characters, but there's many issues in their relationships and a lot of codependency and boundary issues, which makes sense considering Lorelai's mum. Every single time Rory makes a mistake in the series, messes up, is driven to do something, I can't think of a single time where it wasn't influenced by some way in Lorelai giving her bad advice or just not being on top of it. That's not to say that it's Lorelai's fault, but Lorelai definitely played a bigger role in messing up Rory way before the grandparents even came along. Then when Rory did try to break away or say, I don't want to go to uni or make her own decision, her mum would kind of overrule and undermine her own agency and try to control her rather than just like having a discussion with her. And when Rory tries to mature in some way, like, okay, I'm going to go to the gym, or I'm going to go to the Hamptons with my boyfriend Logan and cook for him like a housewife and do all this, and she's proud of it, then Lorelai's like, oh, look at you, and not in a very nice way, just doesn't like that Rory's changing, almost like they're drifting apart. Of course, you can be really close friends, but there still needs to be that understanding of, yes, you can totally be friends if you're mum and daughter, but there's a power dynamic there and just a different kind of relationship, because the mum's raised the daughter. She's meant to teach her things about the world, be in that authoritarian role and, you know, inspire her, and the daughter looks up to the mum, so it's hardly a normal friendship because of that. Like, you've raised her, you've taught her everything you know, but when your daughter grows up, you also need to respect that now she needs to be making her own decisions, and you can give advice and she should listen and respect it as, you know, you're her mum, but you cannot just control her or treat her like a puppet, because you're you living your life and your daughter may want things to be different for herself, and that's okay. But those lines were constantly being blurred in the show. Enmeshment is a topic I learned about recently and it absolutely blew my mind, so I thought I'd share it with you guys in case you find it useful or interesting. This concept had never been explained to me before, but enmeshment is basically in a lot of family systems where you don't really know where you start and end and where other people begin and end. It's just like you're all intertangled into these roles, and it's very confusing, and there's not enough separation between you and me. For the toxically enmeshed child, they may only know of their parents' feelings, their parents' emotions, and they're constantly thinking, if I do this, how will that person react? And they start to self-abandon, reject themselves in order to please someone else. And often, if the child tries to be independent or say no or set boundaries, they're shamed by the parents. So you're taught that the only way that you can receive love is by people-pleasing and attending to other people's needs. And that's exactly what was happening with Lorelai and her mum, where Lorelai is constantly getting unsolicited feedback from her mum and being treated like shit and basically told that she needs to cater to her mother's needs all the time. Sometimes the kid becomes emotionally parentified and they start thinking about how to look after their parent and make them feel better, give them advice, which is what Rory starts doing with Lorelai, where Lorelai is going to ask Rory for advice on topics that really Rory is too young to be focusing on. Or you may have helicopter parents who are overly involved in their children's lives and are just not giving them enough breathing space. And so the child grows up not trusting their own judgment and thinking, is this okay? Or a sense of shame around doing something because they think mum wouldn't want me to do that, best not to do that, and not actually doing what feels right for them in the moment. There can be a lot of privacy issues, family members talking about you behind your back, etc. And I could go on and on, but that's basically it in a nutshell. And this was super evident with Lorelai and her parents because there's just all this boundary crossing constantly. The only way that Lorelai knew to get rid of them was an emotional cutoff, which psychologists talk about, where she just had to eliminate any kind of interaction with them altogether. And the only reason she started talking to them again was to get financial aid. The only issue with doing this is sometimes then you can make other relationships in your life, like with your daughter or with your friends, too important because you feel like you don't have anyone else, which is why I think Rory and Lorelai were so close, because Lorelai didn't have a relationship with her parents, so she had more to pour into her relationship with Rory. And I know it would have really changed the show, but a part of me wishes that at some point again, once Lorelai had got what she needed, she had managed to cut off her mother again and set an example to Rory that it's okay to set boundaries, because throughout the show then her parents are constantly there in Lorelai's life and she can't get rid of them even when they're an active inconvenience, like genuinely bothering her. And I think that's actually really sad and damaging for her because she cut them out of her life for a reason. I don't think there's any shame in it. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is forgive someone but still cut them off and not really want to spend any more time with them. Some other things I noticed is I always found it crazy how much time there is in the Gilmore Girls world. Like, they will always go to the coffee shop before school and chill there for like half an hour. I'm assuming school starts early, so they must wake up really early. And then after school, there always seems to be time to go to the cinema, to hang out with friends, boyfriends, whatever, and study. And often Rory's trip to school was like, what, 30 minutes away? So she has to do that as well. And in general, throughout the week, there was time for like festivals, shopping, socializing, studying. They'd run off halfway through the episode to go help their neighbor out, and then they'd go to the movies and order takeaway. And I was like, how is there so much time? A different thing I didn't like, which is actually quite controversial, is how Luke got really annoyed when a woman in his coffee shop was breastfeeding, and he was like, oh my god, so disgusting. That really pissed me off because it just showed his complete lack of awareness or education about the health benefits of breastfeeding. But also, like, if a woman wants to take her boob out in public and breastfeed her child, it's her body, her choice. She's not bothering anyone. Like, I just can't. It screams sexism and ew. One of my subscribers, Joy, said literally most of the characters, for a lack of a better term, have daddy issues. Lorelai, Rory, Lane, Paris, Zach, Jess, Logan, Colin, Finn, Christopher, Jason, Kirk. It's just a recurring theme in the show and is the cause of many things we see, including Paris's relationship with Asher, daddy issues, you know, he was that older guy. Rory and Jess's dynamic. Rory was used to her dad walking out and leaving her, so she just accepted it when Jess left, but we can see that Jess never learned confrontation and how to communicate. And a good example is how his dad just got up and left him in the diner when things were too intense for him. Season 4, episode 20, I think. It's also very prevalent in how Lorelai and Rory handled all of their relationships. It's really interesting to see how all these people act out because of that throughout the show. And there's definitely an interesting or toxic dynamic between fathers and their children prevalent throughout the series. Yes, yes, yes. So weird. And mummy issues too, but more so daddy issues. But there are mummy issues. Like Liz, she was a terrible parent. So was Jess's dad. He was like, they were so neglectful, did not take better care of him. And one of my subscribers said, Liz, how the hell was she introduced as this quirky character who's a screw up but means well after everything she's done to Jess? Jess grew up in an insanely unstable household with his mum prioritizing boyfriends over him, abandoning him when she got sick of him and whatnot. Literally by making her seem so nice, you're undermining Jess's trauma and just making him like, oh, he's a bad kid, which is stupid in itself because he was also a teenager. Exactly. Also, there are so many moments when Lorelai will literally run after, verbally berate or attack teenagers and young adults, like her being nasty to Logan for no reason, her getting super mad at Jess because she thought he'd hurt Rory, her getting really mad at Dean because he was late dropping Rory back home. These are basically kids she's dealing with, or young adults. You could have some respect and not scare the shit out of them. Or like Luke physically attacking teenagers. Like, what? Just because you don't like one of Rory's ex-boyfriends, that doesn't mean you have a right to go and physically assault the kid. Oh my god. Oh yeah, and Lorelai was really entitled. Like, her yelling at Luke that he should prioritize Rory, and then she was like, oh my God, you shouldn't be worried about Jess even though they've both got in a car accident, because your kids brought all these problems to my daughter's life ever since he came to town. And Luke's like, I've got to go find Jess. And then Lorelai's like, oh my God, what about Rory? It was so entitled, like, he has a responsibility to look after Jess. Of course he's going to be concerned for his well-being. It doesn't mean that he doesn't care about Rory. He can care about both of them, and it just was so obnoxious and gross, and I hated it. I wish that we could acknowledge more how bad it was how the whole town treated Jess. Like, everyone hated him and was mean to him for no reason when he was this lonely, broken, damaged kid who just needed friends and support and therapy and was new to town, and everyone was mean to him, and Lorelai was horrible to him and did not give him any grace, and it just makes me sad. He was acting out and misbehaving and causing trouble because he was damaged, and it was people's lack of empathy or understanding that made me so sad. And even Luke, of course, got more affectionate with him later on, but at points his tough love was taken a bit too far, and it came across as more aggressive, or like he was annoyed that he had to deal with Jess. So Jess probably felt like a complete burden to everyone, and that made me super sad. The final thing I want to talk about is again what my subscriber Anne said about Christopher this time, because we were talking about daddy issues and stuff, and she was like, I really don't appreciate Christopher's character, and I asked for an explanation, and I just really liked it. It's long, but I thought I needed to share it because it's just so good. So she said she doesn't like Christopher because it's like he's paying for Yale to make up for all the years he wasn't there for Rory. Money isn't going to fix the bond he broke when Rory was born. Rory says thank you because she's a nice person and sometimes gets what she wants, but he just becomes this selfish person when he gets this money. Yeah, because Christopher like gets rich and stuff. Then in the later seasons, his jealousy is so toxic when it comes to Luke and Lorelai. She could have explained it when she ran into Luke or talked to Luke about something, but Christopher gets so jealous and blocks everything out and doesn't listen to Lorelai. He is so immature and is the most toxic man she's ever dated after she became an adult. And the whole let's make a baby comment he made when they were kissing just makes me sick. Is it because he wasn't there for Rory in her childhood, or was it because he regrets not being there for them when Rory was born? I don't mind Christopher being a side character in the early seasons. He was young when he got Rory, but he dropping out of Lorelai and Rory's life and came back into Rory's life when it suited him. He was never there for her in her life and left all the responsibility on Lorelai. In the later seasons, he got this shitty behavior, and when he got with Sherry and got her pregnant, he suddenly became the most responsible father in the world, wanting to give everything for Gigi. If I were Rory, I would be so upset and mad because he wasn't there for her. Then Gigi was born and Sherry left and he became a single father. Look how the tables have turned. When he inherits all the money from his grandfather, he becomes the most cocky and obnoxious person ever. He spends all this money on Gigi, gives her everything and wants to pay for Yale, which is fine. I understand he wants to make it up for himself, give himself a little pat on the shoulder for a job well done as an absent father in the past. And yeah, like, I understand what you mean, especially because sometimes it did feel like he almost took Lorelai for granted and just thought that she would always be there no matter what. Like, she wouldn't move on. He just expected things to work out with her, and of course she was going to move on and date people like Luke, and it just sets a really bad example for Rory too, because ultimately, regardless of the circumstances and how he felt and what he had going on in his life, he was too young, etc., it doesn't matter. Rory felt abandoned, and it really damaged her, and she felt unsupported, and it did put a lot of a burden on Lorelai's shoulders. And yes, Lorelai wanted to be self-sufficient, and she wanted to do things right by herself, etc., and she wanted to feel like she'd done a good job parenting Rory, but it still doesn't take away from the fact that Christopher just barely got to know Rory properly because he was such a weak father. And yeah, I think this comment's really interesting. There is no right or wrong answers here, but you guys can let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know if there's any stuff I missed, and I will link the Gilmore Girls playlist down in the description, like I said, so you can go and binge watch the rest of the videos in this series, and I will see you for my next video. Bye guys.